Hi, welcome to another episode of A Witch Lives There. I'm your host, Izzy Naylor. I'm a singer-songwriter, but I'm also big witch, spooky girl enthusiast of all those things. And today's episode is a part 2 of Reddit witch stories. So I've gone onto Reddit and found a couple of stories that people have written. Whether or not you believe that they are true, that's up to you. But I've found these on r/no-sleep. And the first episode was called She Sold Happiness in Glass Jars. If you haven't listened to that, go ahead and listen to it. And I feel like that first story was sort of a warm-up. That was maybe a nice way to delve into the witchy stories that people have. This one is maybe a little bit more creepy, a little bit more spooky. So get comfortable and relax, unless you're driving, in which case, please do not relax. You could be comfortable, but just not too comfortable, okay? This is the story of a grandmother who trapped a witch in a mirror. Although my grandmother never directly called herself a witch, I don't think there's another word to better describe what it is that she was. She liked to tell people that she was just spiritual, and tell me that she would just do tarot card readings for the people that lived in her village for fun. I remember overhearing my grandmother giving the other women in the village advice that usually involved some type of spell or magic on multiple occasions, and she would regularly correct people who called her a witch, telling them to simply refer to her by her name, Marialina. I was raised by my mum and my grandmother, and spent most of my life living in my grandmother's home in her village, where I would regularly see her performing rituals for good luck or warding off evil spirits. She liked to say that we could never be too careful, and it was better to be safe than sorry. My mum was sometimes involved in these rituals, and had some spiritual beliefs of her own, although they didn't go as deep as my grandmother's did. Both my mum and my grandmother would always carry crystals with them. My mum wore hers on a ring, while my grandmother preferred a necklace that she would hide underneath her shirts. I remember following my grandmother around the house every few weeks or so, while she sprayed all of the rooms with the contents of a black bottle that she kept in a fancy wooden box on a bookshelf in the living room. I remember sitting near her while she stood on the porch, burning sage while reciting the Lord's Prayer on Sunday mornings. Despite the fact that I was raised by two adults that were involved in these witchcraft and spiritual practices, I've never really been one to believe in things like evil spirits or setting a bowl of rice out for good luck. Of course, I never argued with them when they did these things. I would simply sit back and let them line doorways and windows with black salt to stop evil spirits from entering our home, or help paint the bottoms of trees white to ward off la lechuza, and drink the moon water that my grandmother would make every month. Even though I'm not the most spiritual person, at least not compared to my mum and my grandmother, I find myself doing things like making sure I stand my broom upside down, keeping a horseshoe hung on the top of my front door, and carrying around the St. Michael's sword talisman that my grandmother gave me when I was around 8 years old, and she was convinced someone was doing witchcraft on me. It reminds me of her, and makes me feel closer to her, even though she's no longer around. Plus, I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me feel safe. The one thing that always interested me, however, was the story about the witch in the mirror. In my grandmother's house, there was a small closet at the very end of the hallway that was never used for storing things. The door to the closet was painted black, and it was the only door in the entire house that was painted that colour. I was told never to go into that closet, so, of course, that only made me even more curious about what they were keeping in there. When I was about 10 years old, I was playing hide and seek with some of my cousins, when my younger cousin Rebecca and I decided to hide in the closet. Surprisingly, the door was not locked, and we opened it to find a single oval-shaped mirror that was hung on the back wall. The closet itself was not very big and could barely fit both of us side by side without much room for us to move around. When our grandmother found us, she yanked us out of the closet, slammed the door shut behind us, and dragged us into the kitchen, where she proceeded to cleanse us. After that was done, she found the rest of my cousins and sat us all down to tell us about the mirror that she kept in the closet and why we should never go in there again. According to my grandmother, when my mum turned 1, she was targeted by a witch named Claudia that had been possessed by an evil spirit. Although she wouldn't go into detail, my grandmother said that Claudia tried to kidnap and sacrifice my mother on multiple occasions and would regularly cast spells on her family. My grandmother said that when my mum was around 5 years old, she finally managed to trap Claudia with the help of some of her friends, and now her soul was trapped in the mirror, where she remained for years after that. As a precaution, my grandmother told us to never look into the mirror or attempt to contact Claudia's spirit. She was scared that we might unleash her accidentally, therefore letting a great evil escape into the village. My mother further backed up the story, and for weeks I would beg my grandmother to tell me about the spell that she'd used to trap Claudia, but she would grow increasingly frustrated and angry every time I brought it up. Eventually, I realized she was never going to tell me, and that there was probably a good reason why, so I dropped it. To be honest, I forgot all about that mirror and the spirit of Claudia until a few weeks ago. My mum and I moved to a different state when I was 15 and would go back to visit my grandmother every other month or so. This last time, my mum visited my grandmother by herself as I wasn't able to get the time off work to join her. 2 days after my mum arrived at my grandmother's place, I got a call from a neighbour telling me that both my mum and grandmother were dead. Jesus. I drove down to talk to the police, who told me that they both had suffered a heart attack in their sleep on the same night. What were the odds? I didn't even get much time to mourn my loss, as I was immediately told that I had to take all of my grandmother's belongings and donate the things that I didn't want to keep. I spent 2 days going through each room in the house and boxing up all of her herbs and random trinkets that she kept in odd places. Some of my cousins showed up and I let them take a few things with them to remember our grandmother by. I decided to keep most of the stuff and loaded up my car with whatever I could. As I was taking one last look through the house, I stopped at the end of the hallway and stared down at the black door. I thought about leaving the mirror there, but I didn't think my grandmother would want me to leave something this important behind. So I grabbed a random bedsheet, opened the closet door, and covered the mirror with the sheet before I carried it out to my car and put it in the back seat. I was getting some bad feelings from the mirror, but I told myself it was just due to the stories that my grandmother told me about it. In the end, I decided to place the mirror upside down and kept it covered, using a hair tie to secure the bedsheet that I'd draped over it. Once I was home again, I realised that I now had a new problem. What was I supposed to do with the mirror? I didn't know the first thing about taking care of a haunted mirror that was supposed to be some sort of prison for an evil soul. And so, after a lot of overthinking, I decided to put it in the back of a storage closet in my home. I kept the bedsheet on and propped it up against the wall. At first, everything was fine. However, about 3 days after I'd brought the mirror home, I began to notice that the closet doors would open by themselves every few minutes. I would wake up and walk out into the hallway and see the doors standing wide open. I would close them and continue on with my morning, only to once again find them wide open by the time I was finished with breakfast. I dug through the box of my grandmother's things until I found what I was looking for, the jar full of black salt. I took it with me to the closet and set down a line of salt under the closet doors. The doors remained closed for a few days after this, until I came home from the grocery store about a week later to find the salt had been scattered all over the hallway and the closet door was wide open once again. I tried to remember all of the other rituals that my grandmother would do to get rid of evil spirits, and did some of them, but none worked. At this point, the paranoia and anxiety were beginning to set in. I woke up one morning to find the bedsheet had been thrown into the hallway and the mirror was propped up facing towards the hallway. I realised I didn't want it anywhere inside my house. After a bit of online research, I tried to cleanse the mirror a few times before once again bringing it inside and placing it back in the closet. I left it there for 2 weeks, and when nothing else happened, I finally took it back out and decided to place the mirror in the guest bedroom. I'd find myself checking in on it periodically throughout the day, waiting for something crazy to happen. But nothing ever did, and I thought that perhaps I'd managed to get rid of any evil spirits in the mirror. I have a question. Why did you do that? That's my question. Why? Anyway, I'm assuming you know where this is going, and that I was wrong. I mean, yeah. I realised this when I was awoken one night to the sound of a woman crying. I got up and peered out my bedroom window to the backyard below, but it was empty. Next, I walked out into the hall and into my home office, looking out of that window and down at the front yard and street below. But no one was out there either. Confused, I walked back out into the hall, following the crying, trying to place the sound. It eventually led me downstairs and into the guest bedroom. As I reached out to push the door open, I felt a sudden chill and wished I'd brought my blanket down with me. I slowly pushed the guest bedroom door open and looked inside the room, but that too was empty. I was starting to get annoyed and reached for the light switch, flipping the light on and scanning the room. It was then that I finally realised where the sound was coming from. As I stood in the doorway, I looked into the mirror, which was right in front of me on the opposite wall. There was a woman in the mirror, blocking my reflection. She was on her knees with her head bowed and her shoulders shook as she continued to cry and sniffle. I could see that she was wearing a black lace dress, but other than that, I couldn't make out any of the details as her long brown hair hung over her face and most of her body. I slowly walked closer to the mirror, stopping about 3 feet in front of it. "Hello?" I asked. The woman looked up at me and I gasped. I was staring at my face, only not exactly my face, as it was on the woman in the mirror. When she saw me, she stopped crying and stood up. Her face was red and blotchy and she sniffed, running a hand under her nose. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Are you Claudia?" I asked. She nodded, pushing her hair back away from her face and tossing it back over her shoulders. She squinted and tilted her head, studying me. "You're Marilena's granddaughter," she whispered, looking at me in awe. I nodded. "Was it you then?" "Was what me?" "Did you cast out the evil spirit that had been possessing me all these years?" she asked, leaning forward and placing her hands on the glass. I didn't know how to answer, since I hadn't really known what I was doing, and it clearly hadn't worked the way I'd wanted it to. It was weird to talk to someone trapped in a mirror. The reflection of the room could be seen around Claudia, but it almost seemed like we were looking at each other through a window or something. "Well?" she asked, waiting for an answer. I nodded. "Yeah, I guess that was me." "Oh, thank you," she sighed. "How long has it been?" 40 years, I replied. "And your grandmother?" "Dead." "I'm so sorry. What about your mother?" "Dead." She nodded slowly. "I know we don't know each other, but do you think you could let me out of here?" "What? No, you tried to kill my mother on multiple occasions. How do I know you won't try to kill me?" "That wasn't me. It was the spirit that was possessing me to do those things. But you got rid of that," she said, sounding like she was about to start crying again. "Sorry, but how do I know that?" Claudia took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right. You have no reason to trust me. Besides, you don't strike me as someone with knowledge of magic, so I don't believe you could get me out of here, even if you wanted to." She sounded sincere, but I didn't trust her. She didn't seem very trustworthy to begin with, and she was right. I couldn't get her out even if I wanted to. "Why do I look like you?" I asked. She shrugged. I stared at her for a while longer, but started to feel creeped out by our resemblance. I left Claudia in the mirror, where she remained for about 4 days before things got worse. I would notice random items missing in my house before they would eventually turn up again in the weirdest places. Lights would turn on and off randomly throughout the night, and I would hear footsteps and children laughing in random rooms in the house. Even Claudia was beginning to look frightened. "You're scared?" she said one day as I walked into the guest room to close a window that had opened on its own. I didn't reply. "It's not me if that's what you're thinking. The spell your grandmother put on me stopped me from being able to do any magic." I looked at her and sighed. "Fine, so what is it?" She said nothing for a minute as I watched her. "Did you bring any more of your grandmother's things into this house?" she asked. "Yeah, a bunch of stuff like herbs and bottles of things, some clothes, books, stuff like that." "Stuff that she used for spells?" Claudia asked. "I mean, yeah, probably." "Well, then it's probably something you brought back with you. Some spirit probably hitched a ride with the stuff." I thought about it for a second. What she was saying made sense, but I didn't want to blindly trust her yet. Okay, so how do I get rid of it? I asked. You're going to need some candles, and you'll have to wait for night time, she replied, looking around the room. I did what she suggested, and after the sun went down, I gathered some candles and went into the guest room. I set the candles around the room, a few feet away from the mirror, so Claudia could walk me through it. Okay, you'll need to light these, she said as I finished placing the last candle down. I grabbed a lighter and then pulled out the jar of black salt. What's that for? Claudia asked. I opened the jar and took the mirror off the wall, leaning it against it instead, and then surrounded the area around the mirror in a ring of salt. This is in case you're lying and trying to escape somehow, I replied, setting the jar down once I was done. I highly doubt you'd be able to release me. You don't even know how to get rid of a spirit, she scoffed. I ignored her as I lit all the candles. You'll need to turn the lights off, she said. I walked over and did as she said, and then walked back over to the mirror, standing amongst the lit candles. Okay, Claudia whispered. Once the candles melt a bit, you're going to drip some of the wax onto the mirror. Why the mirror? Because it's already magic. You can use the magical energy to cast out the spirit. I did as she asked. What now? Sit on the ground facing away from the mirror and close your eyes. You might feel something touching you or breathing near you, but do not open your eyes. I sat with my back to her and did as she said, wiping my sweaty hands on my pants every few minutes. I tried to focus on my breathing, trying not to get paranoid. After a few seconds, there was a strong gust of cold wind that swept through the room, followed by the sound of glass breaking. Forgetting what Claudia had said, I opened my eyes to find that the mirror had completely shattered and the bedroom window was wide open. All the candles had been blown out as well. Claudia? I asked. There was no response, and I got up and turned the lights back on. I walked back to the shards of the mirror and picked them up. It had broken into 6 large pieces, and I noticed that the salt was now spread out all over the floor. I laid the frame of the mirror on the ground and placed the shards back into their spot. But when I looked into the mirror, all I could see was my own reflection. Claudia was long gone. Fuck, I yelled, frustrated. Johanna, I heard a voice sing from outside. I walked over to the window and looked down to see Claudia standing on my front lawn. She waved, and I noticed that her face was changing. I stared closely as it changed from my face to a face with dark grey, leathery skin that was heavily wrinkled. She had black eyes that were set deep into their sockets and were about the size of golf balls. Her nose was small and looked like it was split in half down the middle. Her lips were the same colour as her skin, but they were dry and covered in cuts. I watched as she glanced up, and I followed her gaze to see a flock of crows descending down towards her, circling her for a few seconds before both the crows and her disappeared. Seconds later, all of the windows of every house on the street exploded, filling the front yards with glass. The streetlights followed, flickering a few times before they too exploded and turned off. The street was engulfed in darkness, and I noticed that even the moon and the stars had disappeared. I spent the rest of the night looking through my grandmother's books and journals, searching for something to help me, but nothing that I read applied to this situation. It's been 3 days since that night, and the light hasn't returned. A few of my neighbours have tried to leave in their cars, and the rest of us watched as they drove into the surrounding darkness, but they always seem to vanish. The only evidence that they even left are the screams that follow, cutting through the darkness mere seconds after they drive into it. I don't know if this will even reach anybody, but I'm all out of options. It seems to be getting even darker as the day goes by, which I didn't even think was possible. I can barely even see the houses next door to me. I only hope no one finds out that this is all my fault. I hate to think about what would happen if they did. Okay, so what are we thinking? Johanna is an idiot? Yes, I think so. I enjoyed that story. That was kind of creepy. It was like a little witchy moment. Also, why am I kind of on the side of the witch in the mirror? Like, go off, girly. Honestly, Johanna just seems like kind of annoying. So I'm on the side of the witch here. Claudia, you're good in my books. You're okay. Johanna, if I lived on your street, actually, that'd be kind of cool. Like, actually, how are they eating? I have questions. I need part 2 that tells me where they get food from, Did they all just starve? What's going on? It's been 3 days. So I'm guessing you had enough food for 3 days. What then? What if you were at work when this happened? I suppose if you were like away, then it's fine. But like, say you had like a dog sitter at your house. You can't come back, I guess. Is the dog sitter stuck there? How do they get paid? Didn't think about any of this, Johanna, did you? This is all your fault. That poor little dog. What if you were out and the dog was on his own and then the dog's just there? I feel like this is my issue with it, is that a poor little dog, little cat, could have been just what if a cat just wandered into the street and all this happened and then it's like, what, am I stuck here now? Does this spell apply to animals, is my question. Does everybody age? Are they all just like stuck there together? It's kind of giving WandaVision. They can't escape. Or like Once Upon a Time, if you've seen that series, they like can't escape that town, right? Anyways, aside from my questions that will never be answered because we'll never know, because that's it for that story. I enjoyed that one. That was fun. I want to do this again. I like reading things. My hobby is reading. I'm a little nerd. I enjoyed that. Let's do it again sometime. And that's it for today. So hope you enjoyed listening to a story. Maybe you listened to this as you were going to sleep, in which case, good night. Have a nice little sleep. I hope you have good dreams. Maybe listen to this in the daytime, in which case, have a good rest of your day. I hope no witches are trapped inside your mirrors. If you have any little witchy stories, or like you've seen any online that you think are interesting and you think I would find interesting, please send it to me. My email is awitchlivestherepod@gmail.com. I'm also on like social media. I have been Izzy Naylor. This has been A Witch Lives There, and I hope to see you again next time. So for now, I shall be the witch in your mirror trying to cast a spell on you to listen next time. Bye.